Man, when I was a kid, my grandpa used to go hunting in Oklahoma every summer. Back in Missouri, I used to sit on his lap in the fall and I'd say, "Hey Gramps, how was your trip?" And he'd just laugh and smile at me. That was when I was younger at least, probably until I was about 7 or 8. And he'd always tell me, "It was good, bud." And he'd leave it at that. Sometimes we'd get a story about some big deer he saw, or maybe he'd tell us about how good that fowl tasted when he roasted it over the fire. But when I grew up, the stories changed a bit. You know, T, sometimes when you're out there hunting, you see some weird things. Like what, Gramps? Things that make you glad your family isn't there next to you in those woods. Things that go bump in the night. Things that'd keep you awake if I told you about them. When I was a kid, I didn't think much of this still. But I knew there was something he was holding back. I knew it. Gramps was tough. Gramps wasn't some wimp. If something out there scared him, well, it must have been proper scary. But before I got that story out of him, well, sad to say it, Gramps passed away. I, to this day, remember when we were laying him to rest, though, one of his friends came up to give a speech about him. See, Gramps and I used to go out to Oklahoma every summer on our camping trip. It used to be 6 of us, but then it was 4 of us, and then 2, and, well, now it's just me. And frankly, I don't know if I'm going to be going out there alone, because 5 years ago, well, Gramps and I were posted up when suddenly he and I saw something big in the woods. We thought it was a deer, but deer don't stand on 2 legs, and if they did, they wouldn't be 9 feet tall, would they? Welcome to the channel where we never go hunting alone. Because what we think when we think about big game, well, it's certainly not deer. That story I just told, by the way, now I don't know if it's real or not, but I certainly heard it from my grandpa, and from his friend. And I sure wish my Gramps had been around long enough to tell it to me. By the way, if you like this sort of channel, stick around and let YouTube know you're a fan by liking the video, subscribing, and even commenting saying hello. It'll never cost you a dime, and it'll let YouTube know that this channel is worth watching. Regardless, in honor of my grandpa and of the fine people of Oklahoma today, we're going to be talking about the creepy real-life horrors and elusive creatures that might be prowling their way through Oklahoma in this short documentary discussing the cryptids that dwell in the state of Oklahoma. If you've watched this channel before, you know Bigfoot well. He's hairy and 8 feet tall with a mean disposition and the strength to rip whatever part of you he wants from the rest of you. The only thing big feet have in proportion to their strength is stealth, generally leaving only small traces of themselves behind, with their existence to most still remaining in the realm of fiction because of that. In southeastern Oklahoma, there's a mountain ridge named the Kiamichi Mountains, an ancient ridge that is thought to at one point have been as tall as the modern Rockies, hovering around 10,000 feet. The mountains are dense and largely uninhabited by people, with wildlife of all sorts, fostering creatures such as bald eagles, bats, and minks, as well as predators like coyotes, bobcats, and even black bears. The range extends from Oklahoma into Arkansas, and it even briefly touches Texas. And on its western side, there's a small creek that, frankly, you'd probably miss if you were driving or walking by it, named Clear Boggy Creek. This little creek is located near the town of Nobia, and it's said that there's a Bigfoot-like creature in the region that's gotten an affinity for hopping in the waters of this creek. This particular variety of foot is said to have the classic large stature of the man-like bipedal ape we all love so much, and also his brown fur, but they also say that he has red glowing eyes and a large pronounced brow ridge, almost with a unibrow like that of a gorilla. Those who have seen the creature also claim that he's pretty darn smelly like many other varieties of Bigfoot, like some we saw in Ohio and Florida's skunk ape. Also, I'm going to warn you, while this is the Oklahoma video, this story is a multi-state affair, and many suppose that this variety of Bigfoot, referred to as the Boggy Bottom Monster, is the same as the nearby variant from about 40 miles away in Fouke, Arkansas, referred to there as the Fouke Monster. Because of this, I'm going to refer to these creatures somewhat interchangeably, but keep in mind, for the purpose of this research, I'm assuming they're just the same creature, or at least the same species. It also helps because the Fook monster has gotten a lot more publicity in its Arkansas variant than the Boggy Bottom monster got in Oklahoma. Allegedly, the earliest sightings of this creature are from 1851, when reports of a hairy creature were circulating in the Memphis Inquirer, and in 1856 when they were reported in the Caddo Gazette. Generally speaking, these reports were short and sweet, with locals reporting a creature that wasn't so much a beast as a weird-looking man. They said they saw someone of gigantic stature, with a really hairy body and long locks of hair. Some other reports describe him as a 6-foot-tall, hairy, stout, athletic-looking man that was as fast as a deer. One report actually told of a wild man that had attacked a hunter, damaging his eyes in the process and biting a chunk out of him before, I kid you not, stealing the hunter's horse and riding away, which I find frankly hilarious. Let me know if Bigfoot has ever stolen a car in the comments, because that would be even better with Bigfoot committing Grand Theft Auto. The first reported modern sighting, and perhaps the worst known account of the lovingly named Boggy Bottom monster, is from 1942, when two sisters observed a large hairy creature run from them on a spring evening. This event supposedly happened in Clear Boggy Creek in Oklahoma, where he basically just waded his way through the water, caught a glimpse of his onlookers, and took flight. The better-known first report of the creature is from the 1970s, when Bobby and Elizabeth Ford, two locals of Fook, Arkansas, in May of 1971, reported that they and some friends were crashing in a house they'd recently moved into, and Elizabeth looked out the window to see a huge, hairy beast reaching through an open window towards her. Now, as you'd also probably do in this situation, she just screamed her head off, and the young couple, afterwards, intelligently decided it was time to move away, only days after they'd moved into their new place. This report was actually chronicled to one journalist, Jim Powell, who wrote about the creature in the Texarkana Gazette and the Texarkana Daily News, and gave it the name the Fook Monster. According to his hilarious monster movie-like account of the event, Elizabeth basically just saw the curtains move and thought that a bear was reaching into their home, which, very much may have been the case in reality, and she screamed, sending it darting away. But afterwards it lingered around behind the house for a while. They actually pew-pewed at the creature a few times, but apparently they didn't get it because following this account, there were many subsequent sightings of the beast in the local community. This whole episode actually inspired a movie by one Charles B. Pierce in 1972 called The Legend of Boggy Creek. The movie was a docudrama and actually the 11th highest-grossing film in 1972, becoming a cult classic nowadays. And the movie incorporated a bunch of locals from Fook, Arkansas in it too. Now, in the midst of all of this, I think it's worth noting that one very vocal family was a family by the name of the Crabtrees that had apparently been dealing with the Fook monster for nearly a decade at the time of the 1971 encounter. But strangely, they only had the gall to report their claims after the publication of the 1971 encounter. The patriarch of the family, Smokey Crabtree, kind of a really cool name actually, he leveraged his position of having dealt with the creature to be a backwoods guide for Charles Pierce as he was filming this movie about the creature, and the rest of the family was also included, even getting a song about the Crabtree family's son, Travis, included. I'm not necessarily saying they made all of this up, but I will say their rise to fame was certainly not something they tried to avoid, it seems, and the timing of their inclusion in the story was pretty convenient, to say the least. Smokey also eventually wrote and published a book aptly titled Smokey and the Fook Monster, in which he sort of strangely claimed that he'd never actually seen the creature, but simultaneously how the creature was a huge influence on his life. Now, regardless, the creature's rise to fame was accompanied by more sightings of both the creature itself and its big feet, with the creature being seen crossing roads and jumping from bridges in the 1970s through the 1980s, and there was even a gas station owner who apparently saw the creature's footprints lining a soybean field in the area, although the local game warden was extremely skeptical of the authenticity of these footprints. This matter of foot shape is also probably one of the largest points against this monster's authenticity. To start, the original 1971 casts of the feet revealed them to be long and thin. For the record, most animals have wider feet to support their weight when they're larger. Additionally, the number of toes were sort of weird and differed from other Bigfoot variants, with 3 long, thin toes being present on the creature's feet that went straight out rather than going outward like most toes. If these footprints were authentic, this creature would be the only primate with 3 toes as well, or even identical toes that point outwards, directly outwards, I mean. Now, regardless of the skepticism surrounding the existence of this critter, the community loves and supports their own personal cryptid, and the Boggy Bottom Monster has its own festival attributed to it, the Fook Monster Festival, that's held in Fook, Arkansas every year. This celebration has been held since 2013, and it discusses folklore related to the monster and other local cryptids, with proceeds benefiting the local school district. Frankly, I can't even be upset with this. It's all good fun and benefits a good cause. Heck, maybe I should donate some money from this video to the school district if I ever end up making anything from it. Also, if we're on the topic of Bigfoot-like entities, Oklahoma apparently had a run-in the 1970s with a creature that the locals referred to as the Chicken Man. In the Kansas City Times on March 1st of 1971, there was an article written about a creature referred to as Chicken Man. As the story goes, the Chicken Man wasn't really a chicken, but more of a large gorilla-like beast that walked on all fours, leaving handprints on the ground, showing opposable thumbs. The creature apparently had the strength to rip doors from their hinges, and it all started when, in December of 1970, I presume a man in El Reno, Oklahoma, walked out to his chicken coop and found the door ripped off and thrown to the side. All over the coop, there were man-like handprints at an astounding 7 inches in length and 5 inches of width. I should be clear here, none of the articles about the Chicken Man describe what happened to the chickens, but I'm just going to presume that they were eaten. This prompted the farmer to call the local game ranger, which prompted the door and the handprints on it to be sent to wildlife experts in Oklahoma City, and these experts generally agreed that the prints were that of a primate, so either something like an ape or a man. On your screen right now, I'm actually showing you what I believe to be a legitimate photograph of these prints. At least as far as I can tell, this is the photograph of the original handprints. I'll admit they're not a riveting piece of evidence to a non-primate expert, but they clearly show hand or footprints that are of an astounding size if you believe the measurements around them. Perhaps it's also worth noting that the experts thought the creature's thumb looked to be deformed, or that maybe it had been injured in some way because the thumb was slightly crooked. Whatever was going on, going by the evidence, it also appeared to be walking on all fours and was barefoot. These prints were shared with a number of experts throughout Oklahoma and abroad, and generally all of the people that saw them agreed that the prints were from an ape or from a man. They even found evidence of a similar creature being present in McAllister and Stillwater, Oklahoma, distances greater than 100 miles as the crow flies from one another. Even some individuals in Arkansas had been reporting run-ins with the beast, citing that it may have been the culprit for attacks on their cattle. Now, it didn't take the article I'm referencing long to start to postulate that what they were witnessing here might have a little something to do with the recent sightings of Bigfoot out west, recently made famous by the Patterson-Gimlin film in 1967. But regardless of what this was, the Chicken Man was reported coast to coast and briefly became a nationwide phenomenon. Now, for some reason, if you Google the Oklahoma Ishkitini, you'll be met with a Reddit post detailing Oklahoma's cryptids that shows something more akin to a werewolf or maybe a dogman. But the creature's favored form is apparently a complicated matter, with sources sort of pulling the legend in 2 directions. One that is more local, and one that generalizes the creature as nothing more than a common skinwalker. To be direct, Ishkitini in Choctaw refers to a horned owl, specifically one that roams the night, laying waste to other animals, but also to men, with a scream that is sort of in line with banshee folklore, indicating that something or someone has just passed away, or is at risk of passing away. In some cases, this screech is a foreboding sign that a young child in a family is at risk of passing. For instance, perhaps because the Choctaw likened young children to small owls. Even beyond this creature, the presence of owls near a home was said to be a harbinger of demise, and birds in general were sort of soothsayers of the animal kingdom, with other winged animals indicating everything from forthcoming bad news to famine and more. This role of owls is not unique to the Native Americans either, and is sort of shared globally, with owls having a variety of roles, often negative ones or harbingers of demise. Beyond this, the Ishkitini is a creature that is known to use supernatural powers to harm others, and this creature takes the form of other animals too. It appears to be able to take whatever form it wishes, but its favorite form appears to be that of a horned owl, and this variety of tail is more akin to the well-known skinwalkers of Native American lore. Some even go so far as to posit that the Ishkitini is the Choctaw's take on the Skinwalker legend. Now, this is sort of gross, but apparently these shapeshifters, or witches, differ from skinwalkers in that they aren't humans, but rather monsters that can sometimes pass as humans during the day. And in some versions of the legend, they actually pass from one creature to another by literally vomiting their souls and organs up before transplanting them inside of another animal. Generally, the modern tales surrounding this variety of creature feel less symbolic and more directly threatening, with folks reporting to see an owl perched in a tree watching them studiously before giving chase, or even driving away only to see a creature chasing their car down a road at speeds that no man or normal animal could achieve. Apparently there's an area near Sassacua, Oklahoma that's burdened by this variety of Ishkitini, specifically the area around Bird Creek Church. So if you want to go looking for one of these monsters, that's the spot to visit. Admittedly, from what I can tell, Bird Creek Church no longer actually exists. If you look it up on Google Maps, you can find it, but it takes you to an empty field. So who knows? Maybe there's some irony written into the story, with the location of a failed holy place making a beautifully ironic stomping ground for some sort of harbinger of darkness. Now, I think it's worth noting that in my search for Oklahoma folklore, lots of folks also point to the plentiful sightings of more well-known common skinwalkers in the region, with a common theme being the sighting of a large black dog roaming their property at night that sort of looks like their own dog. They seem to think the creature is disguising itself as their house pet, trying to lure them outside where the skinwalker can more easily prey on them. Now, regardless of what you believe, if there were a place where Native American black magic was still thriving, I'd wager to guess it would probably be Oklahoma or Alaska, with Oklahoma in particular being comprised of about 43% native land. In my personal opinion, if you're roaming Oklahoma at night and you see an owl, surely it's probably just a normal owl, but that shouldn't stop you from keeping one eye open while you sleep that evening. The legend of the Deer Woman is a Native American legend that's prevalent in Oklahoma that sort of looks to teach a lesson to men who would otherwise harm or lie to their wives. The legend is told by Native tribes, often being told to young children or by young adults of those tribes. And among these tribes are the Cherokee, Muskogee, Osage, and Pawnee, which reside in parts of Oklahoma. Now, in terms of appearance, you might be thinking that the Deer Woman looks like a deer, like a dog man sort of looks like a dog. And sometimes this is said to be the case, but more often, she just appears as a beautiful young woman whose defining quality is her vengefulness towards those who would cause misdeeds towards women. As for why she's named the Deer Lady, I've found a few culprits, but from what I can tell, as the story goes, it's most commonly attributed to a legend that says that the original woman who became Deer Lady passed away as a result of a savage attack by men, with her body actually being found in the woods next to a sleeping fawn that accompanied her at her final moments so that she wouldn't pass away alone. Because of this kindness, she was eventually reborn as a human-deer hybrid of some sort, with hooves instead of feet. In some versions of this tale, she actually went to find her attackers and lured them into the same woods where they ended her, only to trample on them with her newly hooved feet, and continuing to live on to punish those that would perpetuate this sort of violence. Frankly, this previously described version of Deer Woman I perhaps have no qualms with, If your intention would ever be to harm another, perhaps you deserve to be scared by some spirit looking to protect folks that are similar to how she was in life. Though, if you believe the more modern tales, which are perhaps bastardizations, it appears as though the deer woman may have lost her way at some point, and they paint the deer woman as the kind of cryptid that would punish someone simply for being a man. They say that any male is susceptible of being lured into the woods, or really anywhere, alone by deer woman, and if they don't catch on to who she is quickly enough, this attraction may lead them astray to a place where deer woman can have her way with them, and not in the way you'd like. At this point, it's said that the only way someone can save themselves is through the use of tobacco and a special cleansing chant. Otherwise, the story goes that you might enter into a death dance with deer woman, where you will slowly be lulled into a sense of comfort and then to your demise. In this sense, the deer woman is sort of like a succubus, a woman that seduces men and puts an end to them. Although luckily in most of these stories, she only targets evil men and prevents them from doing the harm that they would do in the future. I think I should be clear here, in my prior description, it might paint the deer woman as a force of evil, but my interpretation is rather that she is more of a force of justice. Sure, she's a boogeyman, but really only a boogeyman to people that deserve it, unless you believe the tales of her punishing unruly children, which that's a whole nother story. Anyways, in terms of where you're liable to run into the deer woman, some tales say that if you're on or near a reservation in Oklahoma, you're liable to run into her. But other tales, perhaps more appropriately, say that the deer woman, because of her affinity for dancing, can often be found at a communal dance, joining quietly after they've started and leaving at the beat of the final drum. If, during one of these events, you find yourself approached by someone who seems maybe out of place, take a look at their feet. And if they look normal, proceed as usual, but if they get oddly thin towards the bottom, even rounded, maybe say no thanks and pass on that dance. Today, we're also covering a group of little people that are said to exist in various forms the world over. Now, in my Evolution of Santa Claus video, I did touch on this a bit, but generally speaking, little people are often forces of mischief that you're meant to appease, or they might hold forbidden knowledge or perhaps forgotten knowledge. They're generally also Lilliputian, as you'd expect, in appearance, coming up to the knees of a typical adult male at best when full grown. A lot of native folklore in this channel is speculated to be tainted by the influence of the white man, who displaced natives and often re-educated native populations, muddying the understanding of what is true native folklore and what might be a bastardization of their folklore. But it's thought that the belief of the Oklahoma Cherokee in a race of small magical beings named the Yunwi-Junsti is indeed authentic, as is the Choctaw belief in a similar race of creatures referred to as the Kangaroos. Generally speaking, the little people of Cherokee were helpful and friendly creatures, when they were appeased and respected at least. It's said that if they could, the humans would build their homes near the little people's habitats, and they'd leave food out for them. And in exchange, if the little creatures were happy, they would work for them. And from the inside of a Cherokee's home, the sounds of industrious little folks could be heard as they performed tasks ranging from simple chores to harvesting crops. The folks dare not look outside to see this work being done, though, because it's said that if you cast your eyes upon one of these little people, you'd end up cursed, and because of that, you wouldn't be long for this world. Because of this, there are complementary tales that are stories of folks who would get lost in the woods, only to be guided out by a little person, but sadly they'd pass away shortly after recounting their tales to their tribe. Now, in contradiction to these tales, there are also tales of individuals who could apparently look at and interact with these little folks without passing away, such as the tale of an 81-year-old man who kept two little folks as pets, feeding them and having them do chores around his house until his passing. It also seems that medicine men and women, or sometimes witches as they were referred to, were immune to these impacts, as it said they were able to see the little creatures, while to others they just appeared as little flickers of light. Many of these sentiments also held true for the Choctaw people, whose medicine men also operated in league with little people, and these little people would guide them in their practice of medicine, and appear to them in a form that others would also see as a flicker of light. It's said that if you visit areas where some departed medicine men used to live, because apparently little men are immortal, you, as a non-medicine practicing individual, can actually sometimes just see a little ball of light wandering around the area at night. There were also tales told by the Plains natives of battles with a supposedly hostile tribe of pygmy people. Admittedly, these little people seem less like fairies, like the little people I've talked about so far, and more like actual people who were just pretty small. But I digress. The Cheyenne natives called them knee-high demons and tell tales of them actually eating people. They're also talked about in the Shoshone folklore, and they were referred to as a race called the Nimmerigger, which directly translates to people eater. And the Arapaho also had a group of people like this, who they referred to with a name that meant tiny people eaters. There was actually a compelling mummy found in the region too, which, for a while at least, folks took to mean there might be some credence to the possibility of a race of small people dwelling in the Plains region of North America. I know we're straying from Oklahoma here, but in 1932, about 60 miles southwest of Casper, Wyoming, in the Pedro Mountains, a small mummified body was found. It was sitting on a ledge in a cave at a height of only about 15 inches, and there it sat, white hair, with teeth, and even body hair, like an adult. This little mummy made rounds around the country where medical professionals commented on everything from its odd height, to its odd skeletal structure, to its strangely huge eye sockets. Ultimately, doctors concluded that this was just an infant with a condition known as anencephaly, or a condition where the infant lacked the top of its skull, although critics are skeptical of this because that doesn't account for the teeth and body hair on the mummy. Ultimately, the mummy was lost and hasn't been seen since 1975, but presumably it's still out there, somewhere in the possession of someone, presumably someone that thinks this mummy is more than folks say it is. Now, before I move on from Oklahoma or generally Plains region Little People, I should note there's also a bridge in Quapaw, Oklahoma that's called Little People Bridge. And some folks have actually lumped it in with Little People folklore like I've told here, but it's not really the case. The little people that dwell near this bridge are supposedly the ghosts of children rather than actual Lilliputians. I just thought this was worth mentioning. There's an urban legend, native to Oklahoma, that its lakes, in particular Lake Thunderbird, Ooliga Lake, and Lake Tinkiller, have something incredible dwelling inside of them. And the evidence for these claims is the apparent large number of drownings that occur there, as well as eyewitness accounts that residents have been grabbed by strong underwater limbs that, when they release individuals, leave behind an odd suction cup-like pattern on the body of those attacked. If you can't tell already, the creature that supposedly dwells in these lakes is a cephalopod, or an octopus, colloquially, that is said to dwell in some of Oklahoma's freshwater lakes. If this sounds weird to you, I mean, you're right. There are to date no records of any native cephalopods that dwell in freshwater anywhere in the world. The species that is claimed to live in these lakes are said to be nearly the size of horses, too, with a reddish-brown tone that I can only imagine changes to blend in with its surroundings. Now, if you believe the tales of these octopi, it's said that they generally feed on freshwater fish, but when given the chance, they might also grab an unexpected human and occasionally try to pull them pretty deep into the depths of these lakes. So, with the legend out of the way, let's discuss whether or not there's any credence to it. Now, to start, some folks claim that there's Native American roots for the legend, with tales of multi-limbed aquatic creatures or even borderline krakens terrorizing ancient native populations in Lake Thunderbird. And, well, I hate to burst your bubble, but frankly, this is all made-up BS. I dug my way through about 7 pages of Google looking at every account that claimed a Native American backing for this legend, and not a single primary source relevant to natives was cited. Regardless, if you follow the paper trail and look for the earliest mention of this cryptid, you'll find that it started getting popular around 2007, and the first mention of it ever was in a book called Monster Spotter's Guide to North America, written by one Scott Francis. And then this popularity compounded when in 2009, the series Lost Tapes on Animal Planet aired an episode dedicated to this cryptid, calling it the Oklahoma Octopus. Now, from what I can gather, the episode that was aired was basically just a made-up story about 5 high schoolers who went out to celebrate their high school graduation on Lake Thunderbird, and 3 of them ended up quote-unquote drowning due to the octopus grabbing hold of them. It seemed like this tale did the trick, though, because the story took off like wildfire. If you're not convinced this tale is malarkey yet, by the way, especially if you believe the Native American legends pointing to a freshwater cephalopod dwelling in these North American lakes, then I have some news for you. These lakes are all man-made, with the first of the reservoirs actually being constructed in 1947. I guess, sure, you could say that maybe there were cephalopods dwelling in some of these submerged rivers or smaller ponds under these lakes that existed in Oklahoma since it was underwater several million years ago as part of the sea, but at this point, at least for me, this myth is busted. According to the Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation, black panthers do not exist in the wild in North America. They even claim that while mountain lions do occasionally wander into Oklahoma, there's not a resident population of them. Despite this, you will find numerous accounts of individuals in Oklahoma observing black panthers that quickly take to the interwebs to tell the world their stories. To start, what is a black panther, and what is a panther in general? A panther, in the context of North America, is often referred to as a mountain lion, and they're pretty big, with males getting as large as 140 pounds and 7 feet in length. They generally live in rocky terrain and in areas where there aren't many people. In the case of the Florida panther, for instance, they're most commonly sighted in the dense swamps of the Everglades, and males are known to cross travel distances of almost 100 to several hundred square miles during their lifetimes. The creatures frankly eat a ton, and they're known to attack and eat about a deer per week each. To be black, though, the creatures would have to have a ton of melanin, and as we've talked about, the panthers in North America are not black and therefore do not have a ton of melanin. At least that's the conventional wisdom. So, to start with this story, if you Google Black Panther Oklahoma, you're going to find dozens, if not more, posts across the internet with locals claiming they saw, if not took photos of black panthers across the state and adjacent states like Texas and Arkansas. The stories about the creature have even sort of been adopted into local folklore, with parents warning their children not to stay out too late or the big black kitty will get them. Now, back in the day, apparently natives and non-natives alike were completely convinced of the existence of this rare black species of panther, with stories going back generations being passed along orally. But nowadays, as with all cryptids, these stories have moved to the internet, and generally the stories are a little underwhelming, like, hey, did anyone else see the black panther that was dead on the turnpike near Tulsa last night? Or, I seen a large black panther, or jaguar, on this one snowy full moon night walking away from my house in the woods. It was magical, and this happened in the 1980s. All of this is to say that while there are plenty of stories online and tons of locals who believe this urban legend, none of these stories are conclusive, with most folks thinking that, at best, this is a normal mountain lion with a whole lot of melanin, and is therefore darker than usual, and at worst, folks think this is just a misidentification of a large black house cat. Now, as for where I stand on this, I don't think it's entirely unbelievable that a subspecies of black panther could be hiding away unnoticed in the sparsely populated portions of Oklahoma. It's not like the creature is supernatural, and it's not like the tales about the creature are necessarily sparse. So personally, I'll throw this into the it's not unlikely bucket, but I'd love to hear what you think. Do you think black panthers are roaming the fields and forests of Oklahoma? So, this one is kind of just for fun, and it's not really a cryptid as much as a real phenomenon in Oklahoma. There's a handful of escaped kangaroos that turn up from time to time in the wild, either being hit by cars or seen and captured on videos by tourists. And frankly, I think it's worth mentioning this because it gives you an idea of maybe how often a cryptid might be seen in the wild if it were the sole member of its population or just one of a few of its population. Anyways, for instance, in March of this year, 2024, a driver was riding down in Roland when suddenly a kangaroo hopped out of the woods onto the highway and was struck by their car. Initially, they thought it was a deer, but lo and behold, it was actually Australia's version of a deer instead. After the story, a family actually came forward and said it was their escaped pet, and they even mentioned they had a tough time with their loss. This isn't alone though. In July of 2023, there was actually a fairly well circulated report of a kangaroo in Blanchard, Oklahoma that was on the loose too. In case you thought lovers' lanes were safe in Oklahoma because Bigfoot isn't guarding them like he is in Ohio, well, do I have a story for you. You've got somebody else to worry about, and his name here is the Bulldog Man. Now, this story starts with the Bulldog Man being, well, not even a bulldog boy yet. He's just a normal boy at this point, with his family in the 1920s who drove down to an amusement park located in Old North Road between Sand Springs and Tulsa, Oklahoma. But when his family stopped there, they realized they didn't have enough money to get into the amusement park, and instead, the children were just ordered to enjoy watching the amusement park from the gates. Kinda sad, right? Eventually, the parents ordered the children back to the car, but the young, not yet bulldog boy didn't hear the demands and instead just kept looking at the amusement park through the gate in amazement. The parents decided to end up leaving without him, and, well, they didn't come back to get him when they realized he was gone. As the story goes, they were too poor, and having one less mouth to feed wasn't a problem with the mom and the dad. After this, the child lived off of discarded snacks at night, and he found himself wandering the old rundown amusement park. But when it closed down, he found himself sleeping near a nearby factory, on the backside of a kiln inside of it to stay warm. Eventually, the factory workers working there found him and took him in and let him stay in the factory, but this act of charity ended up causing a disaster as the boy was eventually involved in an accident on site which disfigured him, permanently maiming him and leaving him with a face and a nose kind of like that of a pug. This led factory workers to refer to him, cruelly, as the Bulldog Boy. Eventually, this factory too shut down, and without any warm place to live or even a place to work, he took to the nearby woods to hide from the society that he believed would shun him for his disability and his odd-looking face, becoming a hermit in the process and living off of food left outside in trash cans. It's said that he spent his life after this in the woods off of Old North Road. Over time, this area became a bit of a lover's lane too, and soon, his home was a place where local teens were going to park their cars and get down to lover's laning, and he didn't like this, so he'd scare the teens off. That is, unless they left him some snacks, maybe some burgers and fries that he'd happily take off of their hands as payment for the privacy his region of town offered. Now, because of this story, to this day it's said that if you're going to pay a visit to the forested roads between Sand Springs and Tulsa, it'll be in your best interest to bring a few snacks and leave them gently tucked beside your car while you go about your business, lest the Bulldog Man might get a little closer than you'd appreciate. Now, perhaps this is in line with the octopus mania we discussed earlier, but spiritually, it feels slightly better documented than that story, if not a bit more clever, and craftily manages to simultaneously entangle a monster story with an excuse as for why US 64, which runs through Oklahoma, was the final of the federal highways to be paved. This story starts at a humble swimming area in Oklahoma named the Blue Hole at Turner Falls, Oklahoma's tallest waterfall. This is a place you can still swim at, but be careful because it's dangerous, and it isn't just a tall tale. Even the Wikipedia page for this place notes that every year there are fatalities at this now famous swimming hole. Regardless, these fatalities apparently captured the attention of the local government in the late 1930s because many of the bodies that drowned were never recovered. So they decided to drain the Blue Hole and decided to see what was going on inside. In short, they rerouted the creek feeding it, and they brought pumper trucks to get the water out. And before long, they found that there was a hole inside of the Blue Hole, which struck everyone as kind of fishy. So they kept pumping and pumping, and eventually they ran out of hose and decided, we'll resume this in the morning. But in the morning, when they returned with more hose, they found something weird. Something scary. A huge tail or something, maybe even a prehistoric looking thing sticking out of the hole in the Blue Hole. They quickly snagged the squishy, apparently biological looking artifact with a log chain and mules and horses, and they started pulling on it, trying to haul it out. But suddenly the log chain snapped, and whatever the creature was, it ripped itself back into the hole, never to be seen again. Now, I think somewhere in here this became a political joke, or maybe it was the whole time, because following this it said that state officials got together and decided that they couldn't leave the locals to the mercy of a monster like this, as they'd never survive its onslaught because they were Democrats. So they decided they'd dump all of the cement meant for US 64 into this second hold and the blue hole to protect them and seal it up, making sure this apparent monster of the deep could never return. My source for this article, the Oklahoman, credits this story indirectly to one Senator Pullen, and apparently there was a Senator Pullen, a Democrat from Oklahoma, active in the area in the 1920s and 30s, so maybe there's some credence here, but frankly, something about this story just feels like a political jab that I'm not getting. Also, to be clear, I kinda hate political talk, and never on this channel will I jab at you for your political identity. I'm not here to talk politics, I vote instead, and I don't make enemies out of everybody left, right, and center of me. And when I tell this story, I'm simply just telling it how it was told to me. I'm not trying to jab at anybody, I promise. Well, I hope y'all enjoyed this video. If I missed any cryptids, please let me know down below and I'll try and cover them next time I go through Oklahoma. I was actually thinking about covering the Heavener runestone, but you know, Vikings aren't really cryptids, and I also thought about covering the Thunderbird, but the big Thunderbird stories I could find generally took place in other states. Regardless, I thought this list was pretty solid and unique from other states, and personally I had a great time covering it as usual. Again, if you had a good time here, please click that subscribe button and like the video. It tells YouTube my channel's alright, and it'll keep you in the loop for our next video covering Oklahoma's hauntings. Anyways, whether you just started dancing with a beautiful woman, only to look down and see she had hooves for feet, or if you saw a black panther cross your path as you were hiking through the woods, don't you ever forget, it's always story time.